Hey, what's going on, brother? It's Johnny King with another episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. And I'm so excited, privileged, honored to have John Henry Parker, who is a behavioral assessment analyst and author. He's a veterans advocate, just a king amongst kings. I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast, brother, because I feel like just from what we've already talked about, from the things I've read about you, the other podcast episodes you've recorded with other amazing men that I know, you have such wisdom to pass along to younger men, to younger generations. And I'm just so grateful to have you here. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've really been looking forward to talking to you. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's I'll tell you what, I write about in my book too. I start my book off with a loss of a friend, and I definitely have gone through losses of family members and that sort of thing. Your story is a pretty tragic and yet inspiring one with how you've worked your way through loss and trauma and bullying and grief. If you don't mind, give a little bit of a snapshot for the listener who maybe have not picked up your book just yet, or any of your books for that matter, with who you are and how you have found yourself to this moment where we're chatting.
Well, it's been a challenging upbringing and a challenging life, but finding purpose, finding joy on the other side of trauma is really what I'm here to do, is just help people see that it's entirely possible. You know, I grew up in a bad part of South Phoenix with a lot of gangs, a lot of drugs, a lot of violence, and I never even saw it as bullying. It was terrorizing. Like outside of my house was dangerous, and
Yeah, I bet.
constantly getting chased and beat up by groups of guys, cracked ribs, fingers broken. It was just like normal. Like I always chuckled at bullying. I didn't until I really realized in my 40s, like, wow, I blocked it out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But inside the house was equally as terrifying, because my father was a combat vet from Korea. He was in the Marine Corps, and then he was in the Air Force as a reconnaissance photographer in Vietnam, and got shot down with his pilot.
Wow.
And had to avoid getting captured. So he was a really dominant, introverted, violent guy who drank a lot. And he should have gone to prison, because everything he was doing was just completely abusive.
Wow.
And to our whole family. And so I grew up, really in a violent household, like all the time. And I used to, I write about it. I made a science project of my welts, because I always had welts, and they were always underneath my jeans, and I could feel them hardening. And then I have fresh welts over old welts, and it's just how you normalize things as a kid. You don't know any better.
Exactly.
So that was my upbringing was harsh, a lot of trauma, a lot of violence. And so I was terrified, growing up, and then the neighborhood. And then as I got older, I was able to get in the military, and, I was just going to come back and annihilate everybody. I was just tired of being messed with, including my dad. So I went in with a vengeance, and I was the only one of all my buddies that didn't have a felony. So I was definitely using it as my ticket to get out.
Jeez. Yeah.
So, but then I was only in the Army for 10 weeks before I got separated. Like maybe up 10 days before boot camp graduation, they singled me out because I had a pretty severe injury in my arm before I went in. I had all the muscles and the tendons severed in my arm. And so I didn't have very much feeling or strength in my left hand. But I was able to hide out during the induction process with hundreds of other guys, and did push-ups on my knuckles and faked the pull-ups. I was able to get through the physical because they didn't recognize what's going on.
Yeah.
And I thought I made out. But then about 10 days before graduation, they pulled me off the monkey bars, and they're like, pull-up bars. And I'm like, what the hell's wrong with your hand? And when I told them it was a pre-existing injury, they immediately separated me on a medical discharge.
Mm.
So here I am, and my dad he just hates me. Every time he
Just
looks at
laid
me,
into you.
I'm a reminder of him as a failure as a father,
Yeah.
And so I go home and he won't even let me in the front door, doesn't shake my hand, So I end up walking away and sleeping in my friend's front yard for a couple of months, and then a little camper on the side of the house, you know. And a few months later, I got a harebrained idea that maybe I could get my hand to work properly. I could get back in. And so I went back to the recruiter and they laughed and they're like, "No, it's highly unlikely you would ever be considered for anything because I've already separated you on a medical discharge." And I'm like, "So it's highly unlikely, but not impossible?"
Yeah. So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and they're
yeah.
like, "This is bullshit, man. You shouldn't even
Yeah.
try."
Yeah.
And so, but I did. And I befriended, I got in touch with some of the people on the medical board, kind of told them what I was doing. And I was able to go see a physical therapist. Still didn't have any feeling in my fingers, barely enough strength, but I could stretch them a little more so I could do a push up on my hand.
Mm.
And so I got back in. I passed the physical, and instead of going back in
Cool.
the Army, I'm going to show my dad I went in the Marine Corps, And so, and that was a whole other level of hell,
Mm.
right? It just
Mm.
descends upon you.
Mm.
But I was able to, I had some really severe stress fractures in my shins. And I just almost got separated from the Marine Corps on a medical because, my shin splints, this massive stress fractures. But then when I thought about my dad being so disappointed in me again, I just ate the pain. And
Mm.
within a few weeks, they hardened up, and it was intense. But when my shins hardened up, I developed a mindset to harden up, and then my fitness levels exploded to really, really super high levels, and I never looked back. So
Mm.
that was the shifting point for me, was finding a new identity, not
Mm.
just as victimized kid, but
Mm.
like a lot of veterans. I mean, I looked really squared away and impeccable in my uniform, but inside, man, I was broken. I was damaged
Right.
and had a lot of rage, and so that stuff it takes time. You can't just, for me, it took me till I was 52 to transcend my rage.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, just from the standpoint that I'm just so curious that, yeah, there's so many people, so many, well, if we're just talking to men in this regard, so many quote unquote, again, powerful men who have a lot of influence, a lot of quote unquote money. They've got, seemingly what a lot of other men wish they could have. And yet they've gotten that, I think, purely driven by trauma, pain, rage, all of this, like, just very heavy energy, right? Not being enough, trying to prove the haters wrong. And even as I've heard that growing up, I'm like, that just doesn't. I was also raised to believe that God is love, and that Jesus healed by love, and you look at other religions, most of them, the good ones, are, centralized around a common theme of love. And yet so much of the masculine presence or influence that I'd seen comes from trauma and, like you said, beating and then to your point early, not to go off on this tangent, but like we grow up and thinking that that's our only lens through which we see life, and then we pay it forward and we just teach the next generation, sorry kid, you got to suck it up, this is just the way this is.
Yeah.
And I think we're learning, obviously at this point now, to realize that doesn't have to be the case. Your
Right.
generational stuff, your generational trauma doesn't have to be paid forward. It can end with you, which I think is so powerful. But
Right.
how did you work through that? I mean, I can't even imagine what you've been through. And then you sprinkle on top of that loss of, you talk about your son, your brother, stuff with your dad, your mom. I mean, I can't imagine how you work through all of that stuff. That's a lot.
Well, you mentioned God is love. I'll tell you what provisioned me is having a really strong matriarch, a woman, my Aunt Gladys. We called her Glad.
Okay.
And she provisioned me from early young age as a boy on how to save my life. She provisioned me for the hero's journey ahead. And I was fortunate enough to have her. And And I've been passing on this wisdom as best I can for my whole life, and just a few things that she said that tag right onto what you're saying is that God is love. She said, she's researched all the major religions of the world. And she said, if you take out the extreme aspects and you distill it down to one core belief, God is love.
Totally.
Period.
Totally.
She said, you don't have to worry about religion. If you find a religion you want to devote yourself to, great. But if you just understand that God is love, you can get along with anybody from any religion. Okay. And you can respect their model of the world. They can hopefully respect yours. Okay. So she asked me, do you believe God is love? And I said, after thinking about it, I'm like, no, I can't, because if God is love, why are these bad things happening to me?
Yeah. Right. Right.
Like, why am I always getting abused and beat up, my whole family, So no, it may be true for you, but not for me. And she said, it's okay. You're going to find your purpose, and you're going to find out that God is love in your own time. And I didn't figure that out until I was 52. But along that line, after hearing this as a little boy, it kept echoing in my mind. Every time I was about to get beat up, I was about to get into it with some bad people and traumatic situations, I can tell you, I've lost count of the number of times when I had to say, if God is love, why is this happening to me? And I couldn't answer that question. And for me, what broke it open partially was I did a First Nations vision quest up in Calgary.
Oh, cool.
4 days and 4 nights with no food, no water, no talking, no journaling, no writing. You just sit there by yourself for 4 days, 4 nights.
On a solo. Yeah. Jeez.
And everything got crystal clear. And I started realizing that I had a purpose. And that was to really be of service to others and to move my pain, And then I did a bunch of plant medicine journeys, like ayahuasca journeys and psilocybin journeys and a whole bunch of other stuff. Nothing too wild, nothing too out there. But some people might think ayahuasca is pretty out there. But
yeah.
But what I was able to do is I was able to retrieve my soul. Is what it was. What it came to me is that I'm a deeply spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. And so I knew that the work is inside, and I was so armored up and so closed down. I know a lot of people that find this place through prayer. I couldn't find it, and when I went deep into the medicine work, I was able to find myself and come across myself suffering and be observant of my suffering. I was no longer suffering. And what I found for me was a place that it wasn't just the absence of conflict and violence and trauma and betrayal and all these things. There wasn't even the possibility of any of that. So I was able to tether myself into that place of this universal source of love and consciousness, that I was able to bring that into my waking hours. And I did 19 of those journeys. And every time it just deepened and deepened and deepened, and so, now I can meditate. I just have joy in my life. I never had joy up until I was 52. Not 1 ounce of it. I had accomplishments. I had a lot of things that I can look back at, but no joy, and so being able to have that for the first time and be able to express it, it was pretty powerful. I was able to meet my wife. She said I was pretty crazy back when I was young. She said, you would have been a lot of fun, but it wouldn't have lasted. Right. And so, so now I understand how to take care of myself, how to love myself. And I couldn't even say that, my whole life, like love myself, give me a break. I liken my life to a statement I heard about, like the plains of Africa every morning at dawn. When you wake up in the morning, whether you're the hunter or you're the hunted, you better be running. And that was my life, man. I was
on high alert,
running away, alert, running away from my background. Like if you knew my background, you would know, no way you would love me.
Yeah.
Right. And then running towards anything but that. So both, like Tony Robbins says, these are towards and away from values. And they're both like incredibly high powered forms of energy. Like, I don't want any of that. It's a form of energy you can use.
Right.
It can drive you forward. And then I want that. And so if you understand how to harness those things, but for me, it was exhausting. I was working as hard as I could to run away from my neighborhood. I went to work for Tony Robbins. I went to work for Tom Hopkins and Brian Tracy after I got in the Marine Corps, because I needed to mimic success. I didn't know what it looked like. I had a very limited vocabulary, obviously, from being in the Marines. I had a very small compartmentalized level of emotions I would allow myself to experience. And so I'll tell you the biggest shifting point that I could share that I'm going to pay forward right now that was given to me. Pay attention to the messengers you meet on your hero's journey, because they're the ones who are here to teach you the most.
Yeah.
And then you meet them by chance. And so I met one of those messengers 2 weeks before I was getting out of the Marine Corps, and he was a warrant officer, and he was hearing me talk with my buddies about getting out of the Marines. And long story short, he said, hey, rather than sitting here drinking, I'd go to the bookstore, I'd go to the self-help section, and I'd pick out anything that jumps off the shelf at me, and I'd start reading about who I'm becoming. I'd never really read a book cover to cover up until that point in my life. And so I took his advice. I never saw him again, but I've been paying this exact conversation forward to thousands of times ever since. So I went to the bookstore. He said to me, you're going to get out. You're going to realize that the world doesn't need another hard ass Marine who could parachute out of helicopters at night.
Right.
Put around down range. People don't care about that stuff.
Yeah.
And when you go home, you're going to notice that the world is exactly the same, but you've changed. And what you need to focus on is who you're becoming. So I picked up, I say this virtually every time I do a podcast. I picked up The Magic of Thinking Big by Schwartz because it was just a cool title. I'm like, that jumps out the shelf at me, right?
Yeah.
Think and Grow Rich. Wow, another cool sounding title of a best-selling book forever, right? By Napoleon Hill. And then the strangest one that I looked at for a while was Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And the reason why I got it is because he was a plastic surgeon who would make people beautiful, but they couldn't see it. Their self-image was so damaged. And that was me. Impeccable in this Marine Corps persona, but so broken and damaged inside. Yeah. So these are some of the transformational points. And then myself and most every veteran and person I work with is in transitioning crisis is identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. If you're messed up and you lack direction, you're not motivated, you're confused, most typically it's because you lack identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. And if you're getting out of the military, they give you all that, right? You get a daily mission, they give you an identity and meaning and purpose of serving people around you and saving their lives and keeping it together. Like there's nothing stronger. And they galvanize you into this, whatever branch you're in, no matter where you are in the world, you own that identity. And when you get out, you're not. It's like Rambo. You can't even get a job flipping burgers. Right. So I'm packing a lot into that, but there's just so much in the transformation. How do you do it? Is it personal development? Like I was in the Marine Corps, there's no way I was going to go to counseling. You're telling me I'm weak. There's just so many stigmas associated with seeking help. And whenever you're ready, that's why I wrote my first book. I recorded an audio book for transitioning veterans about identity, mission, meaning, and purpose, and about self-regulating. Right.
Well, I feel like to piggyback off of what you said, Tony talks about, obviously, you're towards and away from values, but that will do so much more to avoid pain than we will to seek pleasure. And I feel like if you grow up, as a lot of us men did, with absent fathers, and even, no matter what, it's all relative, but because we don't have anything to compare it to, a lot of us have been deeply wounded by our childhoods. Having said that, though, if you create a sense of identity based off of your avoidance of pain, or let's say driven by, I just need to get the fuck away from that pain, no wonder you can feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said you detached, if you will, or I'm paraphrasing what you said, from your soul, right? From your spirit, because you just were in like protection mode or like survival mode, always on the run, right? And so no wonder you can't ever feel like you're working towards returning to yourself, because you don't have any bandwidth to focus on you until you said you start kind of doing the work. And it's kind of sounded really cool, because I haven't done ayahuasca yet, but I've done some of the other psilocybins. It's like, it's interesting to kind of be able to take a step back and detach from a sense of identity that you have and look at like, oh shit, and you depersonalize it. And you're like, oh, okay. And that does start to give you perspective just as you get older. You can see, okay, this trauma that I went through when I was younger isn't normal. And you start to have empathy. I think that's an important part of the journey that you had, that you intuitively, or you were led that way spiritually, which is really cool. And I feel like it's the older I get, the more I'm like, man, it's one thing to read a book or go to a Tony Robbins seminar, which I've done all of them, and they're super powerful. But like, there's another thing to have it in your body, to feel it versus have it only be analytical or conscious up in your thought. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah, well, our mind is a meaning-making mechanism.
Yeah, right.
And that's all it does. It's like you're in a hamster wheel in a box.
Yeah.
And you're just running, trying to figure shit out. Even if you get out of the hamster wheel, you're still in a box, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So by transcending thought, okay, it's hard enough. It's just really difficult to get out of our thinking mind. But
Totally.
being able to do it so thoroughly to where there is no mind, you're in this pure state of awareness, and it's so peaceful that you forgot you had trauma. It's like a form of amnesia where you're just like, and you're not tripping off either. It's not like an LSD. And I've done some of those when I was younger. It's not like that at all.
Yeah.
This is about a form of soul retrieval where you're healing at such a level. Like, I used to have traumatic tics, like a tick, like my neck I would get it just bolt up my spine. Like I had a memory of something.
Yeah.
And it was a visceral reaction, and it was embarrassing. And I had all kinds of tricks to kind of deal with it. Like, I was a presenter and I'd be in front of a group, and all of a sudden this freaked me out. Right. So I'd act like I dropped my pen, I would do all these little things to kind of deal with this, to deflect it. Right. And I was in an ayahuasca journey, and that thing just started coming up as I'm in the medicine, and my head starts thrusting around back and forth. And I'm familiar with this energetic charge. It's from a traumatic experience that is highly charged. And this wonderful lady, she and her husband were facilitating it. She just comes over and hovers her hand over my forehead and the other one over my heart and starts singing, and the medicine is just doing its work. And I'm threshing back and forth. And all of a sudden, about every 5 or 10 threshings, I go, oh, I just like get this really like, wow, this is it. I'm good. And then she stayed there until there was no more threshing. And it was like a tuning fork.
Yeah, like aligning you.
Yeah. And that tick has never come back.
Wow.
So I'm saying this is like really deep work.
Yeah.
Physiologically, somatically, ontologically, the being part of it, just psychologically, there's so many different levels that are going on. It's not for everybody, but what it did for me was it helped me find a place within me that I knew it was mine. It was real, and it was the absence of conflict. And a lot of my rage went way down. And the other thing that really helped me was I was listening to an audiobook, which I highly recommend to any of the listeners, from Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry. It's called What Happened to You. And what she does is very vulnerably, she shares all of her childhood experiences, traumatic childhood experiences. And Dr. Perry, who's like a child psychologist, he's like a world-renowned expert. He's breaking down what parts of the brain were stunted based on the years of age where she's describing the trauma. And he's really done a good job of laying this out. And then he talks about the ACE scale. Have you heard of the ACE scale?
I don't believe so. Maybe.
This is a big deal, man. This will change the trajectory of your life, like right now, all of us. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, the ACE scale. It's a 10-question survey everywhere on the internet. You can get it anywhere. Okay. And it's just questions about childhood trauma. And if you have 4 yeses out of the 10, the chances of you having long-term problems with diabetes, hypertension, suicide ideation, depression, alcoholism, drug addiction, divorce,
Wow.
all these things,
Of course.
your risk factors are really, really strong. If you
Yeah.
have a 6, if you have a 6 out of 10, those risk factors increase exponentially, and statistically, because of unresolved trauma,
Yeah.
it'll take 20 years off of somebody's life expectancy.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I believe that. Mm-hmm.
And so on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 10.
Wow.
So what woke me up and really put me even further on this path to write this book and to get into this work further is I'm saving my life. Like I'm looking at what can I do to mitigate these risk factors?
You're saving it and adding to it.
Yeah, I'm actually putting years of my life. So it used to be when I shined a conscious light into my soul, it was dark, complete darkness. So that's where the Mankind Project and the Vet's Journey Home and a lot of these other groups are doing the shadow work, kicked it into gear to where I've done so much of this work that now when I shine a conscious light, I see little slivers, little silhouettes, and I'm able to go right there. Like that's where I need to go next. And I'm looking at this as putting years on my life because I know I have huge risk factors, but I've already mitigated so much of it. Like just being able to meditate, just being able to relax, just knowing that I have joy in my life, just being able to drop down into gratitude and appreciation instead of like, what in the fuck is wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
Like I was just my frame of reference was so skewed.
Yeah.
That's what needed to do the work is I needed to look through a different lens.
Totally. Well, let's talk though about like it may be something that you took for granted or still take for granted, but I imagine you have empathy for it. Just how much courage it takes for you, for any man who has stuff, of course, that we do everything we can to keep below the surface, but that runs our everyday behavior, right? But also keeps us disconnected from our soul or from our soul mate, if you will, or from our soul's path to taking our mess and turning it into our message, if you will. I know there's just men that are listening to this, and I've met so many of them too. They're just so scared to do anything. They know what they're doing doesn't work, but to actually open Pandora's box is so frightening. Did you have those moments? How did you work through those if you did?
And I've had terrifying moments. Just even the thought of being on a show like this and knowing that I've published this book that is like it's like an incredibly deep narrative memoir. Okay. It's a body of work that's deeply transformational, disguised as a narrative memoir. Like I don't do any self-help in this thing. There's no 7 steps to doing anything.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing, the subtitle is called The Relentless Pursuit of Becoming Who We Are Meant to Be. It's about the journey. It's about the learning and the struggle. And it's about sharing the lessons that are learned along the way to where the listener is learning viscerally through being immersed in the experience. For me, that, and I literally say, even monkeys fall from trees. Like I'm not a teacher. Okay. I'm not here to teach anybody anything. I'm willing to share some life-changing and catastrophic, heartbreaking experiences because I'm here to go first. I'm here, and I never thought this was me. I never thought I wanted to have anybody ever read this, like reading your personal journal kind of stuff.
Right.
But I've seen this work over the last 25, 30 years transform thousands and thousands of people. Just I don't really do one-on-one work anymore, but I know this whole thing cover to cover. Like I know how to start where somebody is, not just say, here's my program, or here's my philosophy. But I would say to your question, it's not necessary that you go all in too quick. People may have it wired up like, I just can't be that vulnerable. Well, why don't you start deconstructing what you're thinking first? Since we're meaning-making machines, I'll give you an example.
Yep.
There's a book called Mastering Life's Energies.
Mm.
Okay. Maria Nemeth. She's a good friend of mine, but more or less, she's one of my greatest teachers. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
On page 99 to 111. Okay. She has, it's called the 4-box method. Sounds really super sophisticated, right? But basically what it is the conclusions that we hold cause us to gather evidence. Like
Totally.
I had a conclusion that, man, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Like, why else would my dad treat me this way? Why else will these bad things happen to me? So I had to reinforce from childhood into early
Because you're not
adulthood. There's
enough.
something, there's not enough. There's something wrong with you.
You're
and
broken.
my mind to do the only thing it's designed to do, which is gather evidence to support whatever conclusion I had, good or bad, resourceful or unresourceful. And that conclusion caused me to show up in the world as skittish and nervous. Well, if you're in a bad neighborhood with a lot of gangs, a lot of violence, that's just what they prey on, is skittish and nervous.
Totally.
Okay. So they showed up, and it reinforced the conclusion that there's something wrong with me. Okay. And like a hamster wheel, like I'm just circling and circling because I'm gathering the wrong evidence because I got the wrong conclusion. But the instant I changed my conclusion into what am I supposed to be learning from this? All of a sudden, my mind started gathering different kinds of evidence, a higher quality, a higher order. Like you in the military, you know how to handle yourself, you got all this experience, you're not that scared kid anymore. So I started showing up as a lot more relaxed, engaged, interested, curious. People around me showed up a lot more engaged and interested and curious. And it reinforced the conclusion that I'm a learner. So if all you did was look at this page right here and read this portion of this book, you could get out of your habitual thinking and go, what kind of stinking thinking have I got going on here? Like, what are my shitty conclusions that I'm walking around with? You know, people are assholes. Well, and you generate evidence all day long. My boss is a jerk. Okay. Every time you see an email or you hear their voice, you're going to gather evidence. See, they're a jerk. And you're going to show up in a different way. If you take this kind of work seriously, this will shift the trajectory of your life. Like, these are little tools. In my book, I just go into, like, I wrote a chapter about Maria, about my experience of going through her program and how she gave me a lot of shit. She really, really put my rage front and center in front of me. And so there's a bunch of other chapters about mindfulness, about non-duality, you know, just a lot about experiential learning and just building upon it. Like that guy in Okinawa, Japan, who turned me on to personal development, he interrupted the trajectory of my life so thoroughly that 5 years later, I'm working for Tony Robbins. How do I make that shit up? Right? Like a 5-minute conversation, I don't know where I would have been in my life had that messenger not shown up. Yeah. So you and I right now, with this conversation, we are that messenger.
100%. And it sparked your curiosity, right? But it made me think of what you said earlier, these messengers and I just being curious. I'm not really tied to a belief on this either way, but you said like these messengers just kind of come by chance. And do they just, or are they really coming by just when you need them? Or is fate, or is it law of attraction? You know, if we're talking Napoleon Hill, so many different things. Like, sometimes it's like, well, what's luck? It's like preparation and opportunity meeting. You know, it's like, nah, it's like you can call it dumb luck or whatever, but I do feel like these messengers come at the right times. But I think that the biggest component of anyone who's listening to a podcast like this and who's going to pick up your book is that curiosity point. You know, it's like, it's the vital ingredient for growth.
Well, Gladys, the way she said it was, hey, pay attention to the messengers you seem to meet by chance. Someone's like, hey, come here, let me tell you
This is
something.
random. Yeah.
But it got my curiosity.
Yeah.
You know, and so be curious, you know, and transformation can happen in a heartbeat, in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting around waiting for somebody to come on and flip your switch and turn you on, what happens if they don't show up? Yeah. You know, but you can take one thing from this and start. Okay. you can go get online, if you're an audiobook person, become addicted to audiobooks.
Yeah, right.
So self-help, find anything
Yeah.
that jumps off the shelf at you,
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
interrupting your pattern. Go take the ACE scale. It's free. Once you're armed with like, wow, I have some things to overcome, now you can get motivated.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Now I'm clear. I'm clear what my risk factors are. And so I'm working on every level of my being. I just got a continuous glucose monitor. I'm doing intermittent fasting. I'm watching my eating. I'm doing more yoga. I'm doing more exercising, all because I'm cleaning up the stinking thinking
Yeah.
that's been blocking my progression.
Mm-hmm. So, Be the Dawn in the Darkness is the title of your book, correct? Your most recent book, because you have
Yes.
several, right? Are there specific chapters or certain areas of the book that are your favorite to read, your favorite to have written, that you think about the most? What do you feel like are some of the, because it seems like a pretty meaty, thoughtful book, obviously, and you've spoken about it in depth even before we started recording. What's one part of the book that you feel like is just, if you could just take one section out and people really leaned into, is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, there's a chapter called The Warrior's Wisdom, and I really like. It was from a
Mm.
British Sicilian guy named Stuart Wilde, who has since passed away, but it was a week-long outward bounds kind of transformational experience up in Taos, New Mexico, where we get to rappel down a canyon, which I really liked, and then
Really cool.
fire walking. You're doing the perch where you climb up in a telephone pole and you jump off and grab a trapeze, and a lot of crazy stuff like that.
Yep.
And what I really got from that was go first, because I spent most of my life hiding out. And in the military, you can hide out a lot, because I used to enjoy watching people cripple, just like the drill instructors or whoever, these guys, I would watch people crumble and fail. They're just their lack of congruency, man, their body language, their voice tones. And sure enough, boom, they'd fail, and they'd have to get recycled and go back and do it again. By the time it was my turn, I'd pretty much nail it the first time, because I already saw what to do.
Yes.
But I got so good at hiding out that it became my MO. And when I went to the Warrior's Wisdom, you're here to experience life, not to avoid it. And I really, I had a flash of insight. Go first. That's why I'm here. I need to go first. And so every exercise, all these scary things, I lost my fear of embarrassment, and I went first, and I broke through that need to be impeccable, that need to look good. I'm like, fuck that, man. I gotta live my life. I gotta be somebody different.
Yeah.
And that experience caused me to do incredibly important things immediately that I was putting off. That's a great chapter. I
love that. Well, and you said earlier too, like even monkeys fall out of trees. I'm no teacher, but in essence you are, because like you said, if you're putting your book out there, you're putting you are leading, you are teaching by allowing men who are younger than you, or men who are working through their own shit, to be like, oh, look at him with his vulnerability. Look at him with the courage. Look at how he's become, in my mind, a king of your kingdoms, of your emotions, of everything in your life, because you had the courage and the curiosity to lean into possibility other than just accepting limiting beliefs and then finding supportive evidence, right? So you are a massive teacher in my book. Obviously so privileged to have you on, but I
appreciate that, man. It's interesting. I say it often that, teachers fall from the pedestals we put them on.
Yeah.
And so I'm really careful about being all of that. I've worked for major thought leaders in my lifetime, and I've been humbled hard. That's the big deal for me, is I've been humbled so hard. It took all that to get my ego cracked so I could see what's inside. And, I'm humble. I like bringing attention to other people who are doing great work. Like, that's why I like to write these chapters about thought leaders. There's a lot of really great men, including yourself, that are the next generation of men's leaders and men's voices. I don't want to compete with that. I want to support it. So I think that the work that I'm doing is going to be universal.
100%. Yeah.
And it's going to be universal for the women who love us and want to understand us, to women who really want to pay attention to a strong matriarch and Gladys.
Yeah.
Women love the book. And then for men, man, it's about how to face what's going on, because like you said it earlier, it's like you're a sum total of all the experiences you've had in your lifetime, and consequently, all the experiences that you're avoiding.
Yeah.
There's no other way to look at it.
No other way.
So it's about truth telling with yourself. But I would say start with some small elements of notice your thinking. How do you transform your thinking? Like, I'm such a fuck up, or I'm such an idiot. Well, you are going to always be an idiot if you keep saying that to yourself.
Yeah, that's
like
a good point.
little things like that make a huge difference. Like watching, Tony Robbins calls it your transformational vocabulary. Watch your TV, right? Do you realize you just said, well, I'm depressed. Are you really depressed? Well, yeah, all the time? Well, not all the time. Okay, so you're not really depressed all the time. So part of you is depressed. Now we're getting somewhere, which is a whole other conversation about like the parts work, internal family systems.
Yeah.
Game changing.
Yeah. Which, I mean, there's so much there. I'm excited to kind of get into the ACE stuff as well. But I do feel like that's a great, if a guy's listening, that's a great, and this, is fascinating to him, but also could potentially be like drinking from a fire hose. I'm not sure what guys are experiencing, but that's a great first step. And I agree with you. And I feel like I got some of that at Tony Robbins too, coming home from so many of his programs. And one of them was just literally like, I said no to peanuts on the plane. And then I just got curious. It's like, well, but why do I love peanut butter, but I hate peanuts? It's like, huh. And I was like, no, actually, I'll take some peanuts. And I was like, if I just chew it up really fast, doesn't it just become peanut butter in my mouth? And I did it. And I was like, oh, these were really good. And it just made me like, then I got curious again, where did this initial label, oh, I don't care for nuts, come from? Probably around the time in junior high when I had braces, and I'd get nuts all in my braces. And it was such a hassle. I just stopped saying no to nuts, but I had forgotten that. And here I am, nearly 30 years old, be like, oh, I don't care for nuts. And it's just little things like that start to crack the foundation to an identity of this is just who I am and I fit in this box. Right. And I love that your suggestion of just something like that. I give that as an example of like just challenging those little thoughts. I think it's so healthy because then it allows us to become better husbands, better, fathers, better coworkers, better siblings and children of our older aging parents. It's just like it's such the difference between, let's say toxic masculinity, men who are essentially just living by their wounds, and men who are actually committed to healing and showing by their walk and their talk, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a men's movement now, and it's been underway for 30 years, but for some reason with the younger men in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and I have a lot of optimism. It's just like the tribe is growing.
Yes.
Okay. Good men doing their work. My wife loves it when I go away and I do my work. And I brought a lot of men into this work. And what I love talking to their wives, like, how's he doing? And like, I got my husband back.
Yeah.
There's hope, and you don't have to take off too much at one time. But, I look at it as like, I think it's called a Russian, like matriarch doll, where there's like the different layers. Okay. And each time I'd crack open a layer from some big transformative experience, I'd be all excited only to find the next crusty layer. Right. And what I found is after years in doing this work, all of a sudden I finally figured out that my joy is in the smallest one, but it's being guarded by my rage. Like, why is rage guarding my joy? And then I've been able to really kind of like get underneath like this internal family systems, the parts work from Dr. Dick Schwartz. It changed the way I was thinking things, because I saw a bumper sticker when I was a little kid. I really liked it. It said, I met my inner child, and he's a mean little fucker. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was my inner child. Right.
Yeah.
And so, so I was able to work with, I have a really great counselor who is able to pull me out. And he's like, that little kid that was hiding under the bed, that was scared to death every single day, terrorized, I'd done a lot of work with it, doing the shadow work that we've done in the men's work, but I never really took it to the last final stages, which is like, I'm okay, he's okay, we're one and the same. And I imagined getting back together, and I went through this process of collapsing the boundaries of the parts into the whole with those younger version of myself. And that night, instead of waking up and fretting about what's wrong with this picture, and staying awake until dawn, I imagined that little part of me was sleeping soundly, deeply sleeping, like drooling, sleeping soundly, right?
Yep.
And I immediately went back to sleep. And those little things, just energetically cleaning up a part of me that was holding on to fear and terror unnecessarily. I just needed to calm that part of me down and make sense with it, and then make peace with it, and let him know that we're looking at the future together, and Dad's gone. There's no more terror. There's no more fear. And as soon as he was able to relax, he was able to go to sleep, and I was able to go to sleep. So this is, it seemed like a little thing, but it was super huge.
Yeah, no, it's, I didn't know much about it until the last couple of years, but doing inner child work for sure has been monumental in my growth as well. And I didn't know, how big it was. I think it is huge as well. And I think it's so important, to your point, with what you said earlier, just the power of mentors, of how they can, and you being one of them for us as a men's movement, is to see, okay, to hear your story, but then not to be able to be like, but that was you. Like, I can't even see that, because what I see in front of me is a man who's healed, who's in integrity, he's congruent. But I believe you. I believe that you're telling me the truth. So to see that, like, oh my gosh, you've done that much work, or you made that much progress, to realize how important it is to have mentors who have gone before you, to say, hey, let us help you shape your life and find healing personally and professionally, right? And to offer that guidance and support when we need it, I think is, without that, I feel like we'd all just be the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, think about it. You probably don't need to get 50% better. I certainly don't need to get 50% better. But where we are at, a 1% shift, a 0.5% shift for me, like this last work that I did with that younger part of me that needed to be integrated into the whole. They call it unburdening. I had to unburden that younger part of me so I could relax and bring it in. That 0.5%, that little 1% deepening has had a seismic effect on my entire existence. You don't feel like 50%.
No, and I agree, but I do feel like if I go back to 28, 29, 30, when I started the work and I first went to UPW, that kind of opened my eyes before my divorce. I did need to become 100% better. I just hated who I was. And those first several years of doing the work, I was moving massive blocks. And I got kind of addicted to those massive ahas. But then as they started happening less frequently, because I was becoming more congruent with who I was just like, what's wrong? I'm not having these big ahas. And I learned, it's just kind of like looking at Tiger Woods or Roger Federer or whomever, right, who are at the top of their game athletically, a difference in how they hold the golf club. You know, the smallest, the 1% might be a complete game changer for their results as a professional. And that's what I kind of feel like looking at you, and I feel like I'm moving my way there. Would you agree with that? It's like the smallest, it's more like you're just making the finest refinements, but they can be completely game changers still.
Yeah, you hit on it. When I was starting out, I needed to get 75, 80% better. I get that, because I was like, I had no idea what was going on. and so there's a funny thing I heard along the way. There are none so righteous as the newly converted.
Yeah, right.
Man, I was just so excited. I was evangelizing everything.
Yeah.
And but now I'm appreciating the quiet shifts. Like, I don't tell people necessarily when I'm learning something big. I'm just different. I show up happier. I show up better. I don't need to tell people, I went to this seminar and I learned how to do this or that. Just be. That's the best part about it. And I'm not as reactionary as I used to be, and that surprises people. Like when I don't get a reaction, I'm like really pleasant. I just change the subject. Hey, I gotta go. That leaves them in a place to do something different because I'm no longer that reactive version of myself.
Yeah. I think it's just I feel like I could keep talking with you for hours, but I do, on that last note, I feel like that is, for me at least, and I know there's so much synergy amongst all of us on how we have all of our podcasts, just in men's work. I do feel like we're all working towards becoming the greatest versions of ourselves, as it says on your book, right? Becoming kings for me is just becoming where you just have dominion over your life and your emotions. And no matter what storm comes, you are that rock. And it doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. It doesn't mean that you don't ever lose your shit, but you own it and you continue to move forward, and you are a example, if you will, for future generations that maybe we didn't have growing up as children. I don't think there could be any greater gift and to future generations than for us to be men that are like, with younger men, be like, damn, I'm aspiring to be that guy. I mean, Tony Robbins was that for me initially. It was like, holy shit. But at least gave me something to aim for. Otherwise, I was completely lost and just listening to the, whisperings of the wind. I didn't have much direction. So I feel like it does go back to what you were saying in terms of the purpose and the mission and the direction you're going. So much of that is so important for men, and a lot of men are lost. And that's why I just think it's so important for them to pick up a book like yours, invest in themselves. They're listening to this anyways. So keep that journey going, keep that growth path moving forward, right?
Have you listened to much Jim Rohn?
To Jim Rohn? Sure. Yeah.
Not the sports guy. We're talking about the philosopher, Jim Rohn.
Yes.
So I worked for Jim Rohn for a little bit before I went to work for Tony.
Yeah.
And I just share this with you because it's a chapter about Jim Rohn in my book called Success Strategies. And if you want something that's going to interrupt your trajectory of your life, like right now, it'd be these two things. I had to pull over and write these things down to commit them to memory because they were that profound. Because I was so messed up on peer pressure. I just wanted to be accepted. I was hanging out with all the wrong people. He said, you must carefully examine the credentials of those who wish to enter the place in your mind where your thoughts are formed. And I thought, wow, I have been not checking anybody's credentials. It's just like, you must carefully examine the credentials of those who wish to enter the place in your mind where your thoughts are formed. Up until that point, credentials, like anybody who accepted me, they were in.
Yeah.
And so immediately,
here's the keys.
I can understand peer pressure. And the second thing he said was the 3 types of association, which really hit me like a ton of bricks. He said the first type of association is disassociation. Get rid of people that are toxic. Get them out of your life.
Yeah.
However, if it's, limited association, what happens at their family? You got to see them at Thanksgiving. Well, then tell them that you're going to limit the association. I literally had to call people and say, you know what? You're not going where I'm heading, but your family, I'll see you at Christmas. If you ever want to kind of really get curious about who you're becoming, I'll talk to you, but you're too toxic. I'm going to go this way. Yeah. And then the third kind of association was expanded association. Find the people that have the qualities that you really want to cultivate and develop. Take them to lunch. Tell them what you see in them.
Hell yeah.
Ask them for advice, because the reason why you can see those qualities in others is because they are deep down within you already.
100%.
So if you're looking for like, what can somebody take away from this interview today? Like Jim Rohn, like, geez, what happened to you with Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry? Mastering Life's Energies with Maria Nemeth.
Yep.
And there's the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yep.
Turn your journey into a personal development journey, and you'll have thought leaders by your side all around you. And you can take what you need and you can leave the rest.
Yes. Which is such a privilege that we take for granted now in this information age, that we can literally have that in our ears with our earbuds, connected to our phone, and we have limitless libraries, which is so fascinating, so good, right? And I agree with you. I think that's such a powerful point, that we need to stand guard at the door of our thought. I've heard Tony say that. I've heard that. My mom even said that so much when I was growing up religiously. Otherwise, negative thoughts, negative people can, plant a seed and let it germinate. And it's really difficult for nice guys who only want acceptance, who have no healthy boundaries, to start to put boundaries around, oh, you're not good for me. You're toxic, and I need to disassociate from this friendship. But I agree. I kind of went through that myself. It was such a difficult process, but so needed. And then I felt so much more confidence because my life was better. I was like, oh, I can actually be a leader in my own life rather than just letting other people dictate, based off of whatever they want me to do. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting when you make that declaration to people, they watch what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And coincidentally, it was pretty cool. There was a few people that I really liked, but they just had so much stinking thinking going on. I didn't like myself hanging out with them. I just like, you know what? Every time I'm around you, I just feel like shit, and I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to do something different and you want to elevate your thinking, then let's keep in touch. We'll talk again.
Yeah.
And fortunately, a couple of them that I really liked, they just said, I noticed where you're going. I get what you're saying. I have to agree with you, and I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah. That's
which
cool.
is, by the way, one of the biggest traps for men and people in general is it's not okay to not know what to do.
Yeah.
We got to know what to do, and it's not okay to not know what to do. People get hurt, people get killed,
right.
We look stupid.
Right.
So we spend a lot of time ruminating around what we know. Okay. So big chunk of this work is about, is it okay to not know what to do? And you get guys that are like, once you ask that 4 or 5 times and not let them off the hook, they're like, no, it's not okay to not know what to do. Okay, let's start there. A friend of mine shared this with me. He's like, until you can admit that you don't know what to do, you can't create the possibility of creating something new.
Yes. Such a good point.
At all that you know. But when it's so liberating to say, you know what, I just don't know what to do. Great. Let's start there. You don't know what to do. Right?
That's the beginning of the transformation journey.
Yeah.
Really. That humility, letting that ego go. Yeah. So powerful. Well, John, thank you for your time. Where can guys pick up your book?
It's on Amazon, it's on Audible, it's on Apple, it's on Barnes and Noble. But if you go to harvestingwisdom.com, my wife doesn't agree with me about doing this, but I figured I'm going to eliminate any barriers. Right on the front page, you can pick up the first 7 copies of the book in a PDF, or listen to the first 7 chapters in a PDF, or the first 4 chapters in the audiobook form on me. You can just listen to it. You look at the table of contents, and if it resonates with you, then by all means, pick it up.
I love that.
But I'm not just here to sell you a coaching program. Okay, I'm not here to do that at all. Actually, I don't do coaching anymore. Okay, and this is about you finding something that gives you a grip, like a foothold on who you're becoming. And there's enough ideas here that should be thought-provoking where you can come back to it, and I think it's a pretty useful guide.
Jeez, 100%. Thank you for taking the time, having written my own book too. I know it's a labor of massive love and commitment and transformation in and of itself to have the cojones to put, quote unquote, your dirty laundry out there for everyone to see. But what blesses one obviously blesses all. So thank you. You guys can pick that up at harvestingwisdom.com, right? I'll put this all in the show notes too. I'll link to your Instagram and your LinkedIn if guys want to connect with you personally. But man, just thank you for taking the time, John. Really appreciate it. And hopefully this is the first of many, many times on the podcast. I feel like we could get into part 2 and part 3 and part 4. Well, let me ask you this real quick too. In closing, what is one area of your life, of your growth journey that you are personally working on right now that you're leaning into?
My risk factors. I just got a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to go to the Mayo Clinic. I'm going to have a workup. I'm going to go do a lot of testing right now so I can get a good measure on my risk factors.
Your baseline. Yeah.
And I'm torn between giving up my data to do some DNA testing versus having some answers that I really desperately want right now.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm at. And I've got a nutritionist, I've got a fitness trainer. I'm just really looking at, I've enrolled in some programs, to work on my spiritual development. I'm just really looking at softening up the inside and getting all the crusty residual, whatever's there that needs to be cleaned out. That's what I'm working on now, because I want to put more years of my life, and just my way of being has gotten much easier, but I still carry a level of tension, this dynamic tension.
Yeah.
I think that has an eroding effect over years. So now I'm 61. I'm thinking about, how can I clear that out? How can I really, really get that moving energetically? And so that's what I'm doing for self-care. Yeah.
Yeah. Resolving that dis-ease in your body energetically.
And the concerns, it takes up space.
Yeah.
Right. So I like the term recycling. I'm recycling worry into action. I'm recycling worry into well-being.
I love that. I love that. That's a perfect place to stop, and we'll pick up on another episode. Thank you, John Henry, so much. Thank you for dropping truth bombs and wisdom bombs on us throughout this whole time. It's just a privilege to be able to connect with you, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. So thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, man. It's been great. And I imagine we will do some more sessions together.
Totally. Looking forward to it. Right. Well, guys, thanks for listening. Like I said, check out harvestingwisdom.com if you want to connect with John Henry. Pick up his book, I Am, as well, and we can have a little book club together, and just keep investing in yourself. That's the whole point of this journey, as all brothers from different mothers, so to speak, as we grow and we improve and we continue to step into our power and greater versions of ourselves. So until we join you guys on another episode, thanks for listening to the Becoming Kings podcast. I'm your host, Johnny King. We'll talk soon. Cheers.